Good afternoon to the alumni and friends joining us from Europe. Good evening to alumni and students in China, and welcome, of course, to the webinar series led by the SEEP's Switzerland campus. The series sharing insights from the pandemic has been attracting no less than 1,000 participants signing up from over 40 countries. This is webinar number 8 in the series Lessons for Leaders from the Pandemic, normally hosted by no one else than Dr. Robert Stroll, the CEO of our SEEP's Zurich campus. But today, Robert will be contributing from the academic side, and I will be your host and moderator. My name is Cedric, alumnus from Gemba 15, head of the SEEP's Alumni International Chapter based in Shanghai. Very happy to welcome all of you. SEEP's, as you know, was co-founded by the Chinese government and European Union. The school has campuses in Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, Accra, and Zurich. And the school made it into the Financial Times top 5 list for the MBA and global EMBA, something to be proud of. A couple of ground rules, if you allow me, for this digital interaction. Your questions are more than welcome during the entire session, but I will most likely take your questions during the Q&A towards the end of the session. So please, when you want to submit your questions, use the Q&A function in the bar along the bottom and not the chat function. Now, with us today, we have SEEP's Zurich campus CEO, Dr. Robert Stroll. Under his leadership, the Zurich campus doubled its size not later than end of last year. That was a significant milestone in the global initiatives of our school. Robert regularly teaches on the topics of leadership and financial leadership. Also with us today to talk about the difference in leadership between SMEs and MNCs, Dave Hurtig, who started as an editor, wrote about business and finance before founding his company. A company that is offering CEOs from SMEs and entrepreneurs services for personal and professional growth. Now, during the lockdown, Dave interviewed no less than 25 CEOs for his LinkedIn series, #WayForward, something that you will have to check online. Our third participant is Isabel Animus. She used to be a broker in investment banking before she decided to refocus her career and follow her passion for technology and fashion. She's the founder and CEO of iFitYou. I like the name. An AI software company providing solutions for the inconsistencies in sizing, something that all apparel players are dealing with. Last participant of today is Christoph von Toggenberg, a true global citizen, a polyglot who has lived and felt at home all around the world. He comes with numerous awards for his humanitarian efforts and has an impressive CV working for the UN and the World Economic Forum. He now is the CEO of World Vision Switzerland. So these are our participants for today. Without further ado, allow me to turn over to Robert, who will be sharing with us some high-level academic insights about leadership. Robert, please, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Cedric. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Hope this works. Can you all see it? Great.
Yes.
So lessons learned from the pandemic, leadership lessons from SMEs, from MNCs, and across cultures. I'm going to look at this in a little bit of a different way. We do want to have an academic perspective and yet combine this together with our panelists on what is really happening. I'd like to ask in the beginning a question about culture. You all are leaders or managers. Does culture matter? Well, of course it does. To what extent? So I'm going to ask a hypothetical question. As a leader, what smell have you created in your organization since the pandemic started? Have you created the smell of my old running tennis shoes that are pretty nasty smelling, or have you created the smell of roses, this velvety, beautiful fragrance? Every organization has this culture, and this culture has a smell. What have you created? What have you done? What have I done here in my role? It's important to know that the challenges that we have do have an effect on culture and how we lead. I'd like to start with a poll, if that's okay. Hannah, if you could start poll 1. I'd like to ask you a question and keep this a little bit interactive. So, which of these best describes you during the last 3 months? Are you a hero? Have you been a servant or a shepherd? Or are you a victim to what's been happening around you? If you could take a vote on this, I'd like to see your answers. So the results. So by of your own accord, it doesn't surprise me, and I'm smiling, that 70% of you have called yourself a servant shepherd. Is this what your clan would say about you? Is this what your family and friends around you that you've been locked down with would say about you? Is this what your team would say about you? Don't forget this question. We're going to come back to it. These terminologies. I want to ask you another question to keep the poll going. Can we see the second poll, Hannah? So during the last 3 months of lockdown, which of these activity patterns most often describes your behavior? Proactive. Great. Remember this. So 52% called yourself proactive or interactive. Remember these as well. Only a couple of you inactive and retractive at 2%. So quite interesting. Remember these. So from a leadership theory perspective, there's lots of leadership theories. What works, what doesn't work, what's right, what's wrong. Well, I can say context matters. In the current situation that we've been in, it really depends on your organization. Are you in a lockdown phase of real growth? We saw many firms that really were growing. We see many organizations that were absolutely stifled and shut down, even fighting with bankruptcy or having gone bankrupt. Like if we look in the travel business, the education business is that way. But when we look in retail, especially online retail, it's absolutely booming. We have companies here in Switzerland that has literally said, stop sending us online orders. We can't even produce them in the time. So when we look about the leadership theories, we see some theories that focus on satisfaction. We see other theories that focus on security. We see some that focus on your task orientation as a orientation of leadership. So this is one particular thought process from an organization called Human Synergetics. This actually goes back to Maslow's theory, going back to 1944, and has been built upon consistently through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. This has been done for this type of assessment that I'm looking at of leadership theories has been looked at from thousands of organizations and individuals around the world. And what we see is the following. The blue area are constructive leadership styles with these types of factors affiliated with it. The green area is what we call passive defensive leadership styles. And the red area is aggressive defensive leadership styles. Don't forget, context matters. There's a time and a place for all of this, okay? It's not that one is definitely better than the other, okay? I'd like to ask poll 3 real quick, if we can see poll 3 come up. Actually, let's wait. Can you turn that right back off? Yeah, sorry. Okay, let's keep going for a minute. So what do these stand for? So the blue actually is the area that where you want to be. The green is where you do not want to be. You are a follower, you're passive, defensive, your goals are ambiguous. The culture is of no rewards or punishment, and appraisals are not fair nor subjective. The blue area, the area that everyone thinks is the place to be, it's constructive. We have joint goals. We have a rewards culture and a developmental attitude towards appraisals in terms of my leadership style. The red area is aggressive, it's defensive, it's about power, it's about status. However, it's where we sometimes want to be. The goals often unrealistic. Culture is of rewards and punishment, the carrot and the stick, and appraisals are comparative and are linked heavily to punishment. When we look at the personal needs or motivators for leaders in these different types of instances when they're leading, it looks like this. People who are in the blue zone, they're other enhancing and they're doing good for their clan meaning their firms and their families. The green are self-protecting. They're being good. They're behaving. They're staying within the box. And the red are self-promoting and they're looking really good. Where are you? So when we go back to the questions of what is your leadership style that represents you best over the last 3 months, we saw proactive and we saw interactive being the two. So that's great. You all think you're moving to the blue zone. Again, I asked the question, is this what the people around you would be saying? From a risk perspective, these are the types of risk mentality towards risk, managing, avoiding, seeking. When it comes to the personal status in the organization, you're in balance or you're subordinate or you're superordinate to the firm or the organization you're working in. When we look at your well-being view of where you stand with well-being, you're optimistic, you're depressed, or you're anxious. This is your driver. What is your type? This is your servant type. It matches. You guys know where this is going. Down here, you're the victim. It's not my fault. You know, if it wasn't for the pandemic, we'd be growing. And here, you're the hero. You've got to be the hero. From the organizational performance side, it's sustainable, it's vulnerable, and here it's volatile. The ideal versus actual, I mentioned that before. Looking at 560 firms, this is what people say the ideal culture in their firm would be of leadership. And yet when we look at individual firms about what they say about themselves and then what other firms say about them, there's a big delta versus the ideal and to who you even say you are. So it's quite interesting. This is a combination between some these are European firms on the top. These are Chinese firms on the bottom. They happen to be a little bit more red on the bottom. Here we happen to see a lot more green, actually, the follower. So what are the best leaders doing more of during the crisis? This is also coming back to the literature. Regardless of size, regardless of culture, meaning it doesn't matter if they're European or Asian, doesn't matter if they're SMEs, how they're doing it is different. But what are the main contexts that we come to? One, they nurture their people. They nurture their people. What does this mean? It means that they're oozing with empathy for the team and for their clan. They think with and for their clan. They're thriving. They're growing in the desert, right? You know that picture of the desert and a flower growing in the desert. They're thriving. They're growing in the desert. They're communicating. It's about communicating continuously, quickly, and decisively. It's being disruptive. It's seeing an opportunity in this challenging times to grow. past the status quo. It's pull. They pull people in. They invite you into their space because they're empathetic, because they're compassionate towards you. They're authentic. How many times have you had to have almost a Zoom meeting like this in your underwear? Maybe not your underwear, but with your cats and your kids running around you. We have invited people into our lives about who we are, and the authenticity is very, very important. We're vulnerable. And finally, the best leaders are thankful. They're not taking the people around them for granted. They're saying thank you. They're meaning they are thankful. They're saying thank you, and they're showing their thanks. So the lesson out of this for all of me is be blue. Cedric, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Robert, for this very interactive sharing. We will remember that corporate context matters and that leadership effectiveness depends on a company's challenges and other forces. I wonder if Dave will be echoing some of these thoughts as well. Remember that Dave interviewed no less than 25 CEOs for his series Way Forward. This all happened very recently during the lockdown. So Dave, would you mind sharing a bit more about this?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Cedric. So during my interviews, I found that there were kind of 7 categories that I found more interesting or more important than others. And I just give you the full list of the 7 to begin with. And the first point here is survival. I think that's pretty intuitive. First of all, you need to make sure that your organization survives. We had Rahel Kindermann-Leuthard, CEO of Clear to Land, as one of the interviewees in the series. And she's a pilot as well. And she says, whenever a pilot gets into a crisis, the first rule is to restore the ability to act at all times. I think we can make sense of that for our own situations. I also interviewed Caroline Gross, CEO of Smarter in London. She was on this SEEPS webinar series, I believe 3 weeks ago. And she told me that the first step, what she had to do was to secure a 12-month runway for her company. And in order to achieve that or to plan for that, she had to let go 6 of her 17 full-time employees. That must have been a hard thing to do. The second topic, big topic, as Robert already mentioned, is team. And when it comes to team, I would like to give you a few anecdotes. Patrick Mathers, CEO of Vision, he told me the story of how his HR person sent all of the 42 employees a plant to their homes, a plant in a pot, a small plant in a pot, with the intention that it grows over time and that people start talking about it. And this is exactly what happened. So they had this plant in the background when they were on video calls. And the whole idea of it is that you let your plant grow and then you bring it to the office once everybody can gather at the office again. A wonderful idea, I think. And you, Robert Straw, you told us, or you told me that you had a well-being call for your team from the beginning. And it was, I believe, forbidden to talk about anything work-related on that daily call. Instead, you just asked yourself, like each other, how are you feeling today? And you discussed only that. I like that as well. Several CEOs told me that when people started to work from home, when everybody went to their remote offices, that there was no alternative to just trust. Trust your people, that they will do the best that they can, even though their families are around and you have no control whatsoever anymore. Just trust your people, and that's the way you have to deal with that. The third point, and that is also something that Robert mentioned, is communication. And of course, communication and leadership, they go hand in hand all the time. But during the crisis, that became an even more important topic. And Oliver Jausi, the CEO of Bank Zimmerberg, a company of 40 people, for instance, he told me that the 5 people who worked from home, they needed much more detailed information about what was going on in the physical spaces of the business. Whereas those 35 who still could come to one of the 4 or 5 offices, they kind of separated into 2 parts, 2 kinds of groups. One was the group of people that wanted to discuss things in depth, and other people said, you don't need to feed me all this information. I just want to do my job. And they had to adapt to all of these situations, not to everybody individually, but they kind of created groups and communicated with groups in different ways. Bénédicte Chermanier, he's the CEO of Tsai, and he told me that, I mean, usually CEOs, founders, leaders of all kinds, they want to be strong and also be seen as strong, always knowing what to do next. And to him, it was important during this crisis, he said, that he could also express his biggest fears and share them with his team. I like that as well. Many CEOs told me that clarity is key. We all hear that. Sometimes it's hard to do, especially during tough times when you have to communicate things like, for instance, we have to let you go. But still, clarity is key. And Bilge Apak, CEO of WeWent, she even said, clarity is kindness. The 4th big topic, opportunities. And that's interesting to me because CEOs, of course, and that maybe plays a little into the red area, Robert, I'm not sure, but maybe plays a little into the red area. We want to see opportunities. We want to be strong. We know what to do. And when I asked about concrete examples of what opportunities people actually see right now, it started getting fuzzy usually very quickly. And I have my own interpretation of that. I believe that many businesses don't really have a culture of innovation or continuous improvement. And that most of us most probably thought that having some brainstorming sessions with the team would translate into innovations. I'm totally of the opinion that this is not the case, that we need methods to work that and to be really innovative. And I believe that we can get much better. Almost all of us can get much better at this. Topic or cluster number 5, decision-making. You mentioned that before, Robert. Many CEOs told me that it's important in a situation like this to just pick one option. Like if you're not sure which way is the right one to go, just pick one, implement and do that. And Matthias Schranner of Schranner Negotiations Institute, he told me that you have to detach yourself from the emotion of the current situation. And of course, I had to ask him, how would you do that? Because it sounded like PR talk to me at first. But then he gave me his example of how he does that. And he goes back to notes about the strategy, about the future of his company that he had taken before an emotional situation actually shows up. And he looks at those notes that he took in a time when he was completely sober and rational. And he reassesses them, reprioritizes, and then makes new decisions based kind of on his sober himself. Number 6, the clients. And one of the examples that I liked very much comes from Isabel Animus, and she's one of the panelists on this webinar, and you will see her soon. And she told me that she knew that her clients weren't gonna buy. She is the CEO of iFitU, as Cedric told us before. That's a business in the fashion industry, and everybody still is in survival mode there. So people would not buy from her at the moment. But she said, I still wanted to show my face. I still want to show my face. Isabel, you can talk about this a little more when we talk with you, when we have you on the panel. And I think that's a real good thing to do in a situation like that one. And also Christoph von Tockenburg, who we will see on this panel as well, CEO of World Vision Switzerland. What I liked about you, or what you told me, is that you guys have a new campaign, a global campaign going. You started it during the lockdown. Of course, you're in the non-profit organization business, a charity, and you guys do that all the time, but it would be interesting to hear a little more about that because you stayed in touch with your clients kind of immediately. Andy Kehl, CEO of Dare Design, he almost forced his salespeople to call the whole A and B list of clients, a few hundred people, and they didn't want to do that because they said, nobody's interested in talking with us right now. And he said, you have to do it. And that played nicely, well for him, played out well for him. Number 7, the readiness. And there's 2 elements to readiness. One, when things lighten up again, what do you do? Are you ready for that? And the other thing, of course, is what do you do when more bumps in the road show up? And when we have a new crisis, maybe like this one in the future. And I would like to tell you give you two examples of CEOs, one being Reto Lemler, CEO of Testing Time, a company of 27. And he says they practice agility all the time. And he gave me examples. I want to give you three. For instance, they have this challenge where a software engineer has to do a sales call. Imagine that. Or they have, every month they have somebody from the team stand up and talk to the whole team, to the whole group. And even those people who consider themselves to be shy have to do that once in a while. And that is, the idea behind it is to just get out of the comfort zone and do things that you don't want to do or don't do on a daily basis. And the third thing, imagine they did a remote work week back in 2019, and that played out nicely for them as well. And the last CEO that I would like to mention is Ronnie Tingler, CEO of MBV, and he is the only one who actually mentioned or used the term continuity program. And he said it takes him 3 hours at least per month to go through all the measures that they take in order to be ready for almost anything when that happens. And he said anytime, like every month when he gets to those 3 hours or this half a day, he thinks, oh, I could skip it. I could do other stuff, more important stuff right now. And he had the discipline to always do it every month, do that work and kind of be true to himself, keep doing that. And that has also served him really well. They were ready, a team of 60 people with production sites, like physical production sites. They were ready almost on day one because they had their IT ready. And that's that. I want to thank all of the CEOs who I was able to interview. Thank you very much that you took the time to talk with me and to also, I hope, help others through that. And if you would like to ask me questions or to connect with me, please do that as well. Back to you, Cedric.
Thank you, Dave. Survival, team, communication, and much more. Now, Dave and Robert have been sharing some key concepts. Let us open this up for all panelists to join, because our other two panelists have actually been facing clients during the pandemic and lockdown. They have been facing quite a few challenges. So what can we learn from them? Allow me to start with Christoph von Toggenburg. Christoph, two members of your staff, if I'm not mistaken, caught the coronavirus. Now, you mentioned in your interview with Dave that your tip for CEOs is to focus on vision and not to worry. Not to worry. So how did you manage this before and during the lockdown? I think you have a few actionable items that you want to share with us. Christoph, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cedric. Much appreciated. I think as Dave was mentioning, I think for us it's a slightly a special scenario, and I maybe give you an oversight of actually just briefly what we do so you get a sense. The interesting thing is, of course, that is our work. So we do work, we help the most vulnerable children around the world. Let me just share here some of the slides. There we go. So when the lockdown actually happened, or COVID, it was the first time in the organization's history, and World Vision is 70 years old, that we launched a global campaign where we really included all our offices. So we are a federalistic organization working in 100 countries, and we immediately launched in 18 of the most affected countries and have expanded this now to 28 of the most affected countries. Our focus are children in the most dire needs, because they are unfortunately also really hard hit by the indirect consequences of this pandemic. And what was interesting for us is, although we are very well prepared for this type of scenario, and it is our work, we faced quite a few challenges, but we also had a lot of opportunities. So the advantages of an organization like us, we've been on the forefront, for example, in fighting Ebola, the last Ebola outbreak, for example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we learned immediately that communication is one of the key parts actually to let people know about how not to contract the disease. So one of the things we did, for example, we included faith leaders into our work, and they're spreading the messages across their communities. Right now, we have included 80,000 faith leaders around the world, helping us so that the people on the front, people in the villages know how not to contract the disease. The example is in Ebola, for example, people should not bury their dead according to the traditional methods, because they would touch them and they would contract the disease. And also we activated our 200,000 community health workers around the world. So it was an immediate response. It was almost overwhelming for us as leadership to deal with such dimensions, but I was also deeply impressed how fast the organization was ready to respond. And over time, our approach is long-term, so we're strengthening health systems within the different countries so that this will go also way beyond of just what is happening right now in the emergency of the situation. We were, by the way, active from the very beginning when the outbreak started in China, and that gave us to some extent a little bit of a head start also here in Switzerland. And I mean, Dave mentioned that before. I used to work for almost 10 years on the forefront of conflicts around the world. So I was very used to deal with very uncertain environments. But of course, for my team here in Switzerland, and obviously me having grown up in this picture perfect country, I never expected to be leading in a real sort of first-hand crisis in this country. But of course, for many of my team members, this was a brand new situation. Of course, we know about the realities in the field, but does that mean we working here in our offices in Zurich know exactly how actually we live through that and how the leadership is going through that? So I wanted to share some of the tips with you. And I think I just want to start this off with a little quote here. And I think one of the things that I took away from all of this, and this was a question I was often asked, how do you always keep such an optimism? So anyone who knew me in these 10 years, I've been facing some of the worst wars in the world. I've nearly been killed 10 years ago in the Central African Republic in an assassination attempt. And I've been dealing with some of the most brutal people on the planet. Despite of the fact, I've stayed always optimistic. And I think it comes back to something that Winston Churchill said so famously once. He said, a pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. And I think this is really what we need to focus on. And I realized, for example, in my team, when they were so taken aback, my role was to be not just a commander-in-chief, but to be the optimist-in-chief. And my two key factors actually were there right from the beginning: to have a vision and to lead with humility. So the important thing is here as a takeaway, I mean, it is important in a situation like that, be the commander-in-chief. Your team needs you, it needs strong leadership. And that means also taking decisions and standing behind them. But it also means you're never alone in your decisions. And I think that's the key factor is, and I think this is the difference between a humble servant leader and an autocratic leader, is the fact that you actually listen and you lead with informed decisions. So it means you surround yourself with people who can help you to get to make the best decisions. But you also take full ownership. So the ownership means allow your team to be vulnerable and stand behind of what they do. I mean, people made mistakes during that time, and that is fine. There's a huge amount of pressure, the pressure of suddenly working in a different way, not knowing is going to be tomorrow. Also for us as an organization, do we get the donations that we need to run our global operations, to continue our response to COVID? All these big questions that suddenly come up. The part that I found particularly important is, and Simon Simek said this very nicely when he put that term, leaders eat last. So as a commander-in-chief, you stand there like a rock and you are the last one to leave the boat. It wasn't any different here. It wasn't any different in conflict zones. And that is not always easy. I came to points where I was totally not just on my limits, but beyond my limits. And then, but the good thing is what I had developed over my time working in conflicts is really what I call survival mechanisms. So there is those moments that are so dark that it is really almost impossible to see the light, the end of the tunnel. And I always said, like, that's the moment when you just close your eyes and you keep on running and it's gonna be okay. The resilience, as I just mentioned, I think the important thing here is, and I think this is also one of the things to take forward for those of us who really suffered very heavily. I think there's a big question around the fact, how can we actually strengthen our resilience? How can we become actually those captains on those ships standing strong for our teams and for the work that we need to do? That will be an important learning, and I think a lesson for many of us to take forward. Another thing that I really realized, and that stressed the team, for example, a lot, is what is all this uncertainty? As a leader, you need to go through constant uncertainty. You just don't know what's tomorrow. And I mean, when we were working in conflicts, a conflict is one of the most unpredictable places you can be in. You don't know how the situation is going to be tomorrow. So all you do is basically, you try to find your Northern Star within the uncertainty. And very, very important, think and think more. The team is everything. And this is what I feel as a leader. Yes, I may be the captain on the boat, but ultimately I'm just one person. I have one brain. And that means the team is actually doing all the hard work and makes everything possible. So it's incredibly important for the leader. Thank your team and thank them again for everything they do. It is a question of communication. One of the mistakes we did, for example, we didn't communicate enough at the beginning, and then we really beefed that up. In this uncertainty, people were really afraid. So they needed some clear directions, and that clearly needed to be communicated. And it doesn't just mean professional communication, as we heard before. It's really about meeting each other, talking about fun things, talking about what people actually also enjoyed about the home office. So there's a great, I mean, some people had incredible experiences. You know, some relationships were healed, some became more challenging. There were so many different stories that really came out during this time and how people shared that. And I found that very beautiful. Prediction and planning is very important. We did create immediately various scenarios like we did in conflict areas. It was so important to be ready for each of those scenarios. That gave a certain amount of certainty and clarity, particularly because we could pull them out like a drawer when things became more difficult. And fear is a very bad advisor. So never lead on fear. I mean, don't make your staff or your people or your team afraid, but the important thing is also when fear hits yourself, take a step back, take a deep breath, and then lead with humility and look that you find a way out of that fear. Disrupt and learn fast. I think particularly in an environment like here where you could predict and plan for a long time, it was important that you would change and course correct immediately. And you're not alone, but you're connected. Even as a CEO, you just need to find the right people that you can actually also sometimes have a shoulder to cry on. I think that was very important. And ultimately, everyone in your team is a leader. And so you have to empower them. Over to you, Cedric. Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph, for this very clear action points on what a leader should do. Let me bring in Isabel. Isabel, who, like many alumni working in retail, has been facing a retail in turmoil, and yet Isabel seems as optimistic as Christoph. I like, Isabel, how you talked about the importance of moving forward after making or after facing very, very challenging times. Now, let me bring this up in our panel discussion. Can you share with us what mistakes you have made during the lockdown or crisis, and what your reflections would be on these?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for your important question. I think as the lockdown hit us, and of course hit our customers most importantly, one of the mistake, the one I was talking about in particular, is one has to first acknowledge, right, when they have made a mistake in order to move forward ahead of it. And the one I realized very fast was that I did not involve all the people in our company, at least not all the key people, in what should be, you know, our initial like task force, if you want. And I think that in order to plan for the weeks ahead, the months ahead, and also the years ahead, right? So we have to think about the future, not the next 6 months only, but also the next 2 to 3 years. You have to involve people in your organization that maybe you don't do right away. So I think more people should have been involved from the first, you know, few weeks of the lockdown, so that they could also, because they also speak to customers, right? So they have a good sense of what's happening, what is the disruption fashion retailers in particular are experiencing, whether it is from Australia all the way to the United States, where we have customers as well. So just listening to them, who is furloughing, what is the situation with their inventories, etc. And those people can participate, of course, also in the decision-making process, and at least in establishing what should be our new ways of talking to customers, not selling, like Rob mentioned, right, right away, and Dave as well, but it's more the empathy towards the customers, and what can we do. I think what we saw before in your survey, Rob, was very interesting, right, with the nurturing. You call it also empathy, and I think it's key to maintain this customer trust, as well as your employees' trust, and eventually also your investors or shareholders' trust, right? It is very, very, it's key. It's very important. Yes.
Thank you, Isabel. So this balance, empathy, nurturing style, and a more direct style keeps popping up. Robert, you mentioned that leaders, especially in times of crisis, in times of lockdown, need to balance between what you called a nurturing leadership style and a more directive leadership style. Now, how difficult, how easy is this? Because to me, it sounds almost an impossible task.
Yeah, it's tough. You have to be a chameleon. Leaders need to be chameleons, and it's contextual. A smart leader doesn't only have one leadership style. They have multiple leadership styles in their toolbox that they can use at the spur of the moment. So let me give you a quick example about how this red, green, blue looks like, right? So in the early morning, you might have a meeting with your boss. who is a very, very strong, powerful, directive leader. In that meeting, we all automatically become green in that moment because we want to survive that meeting. And if our boss if she's really strong, very directive, telling us what to do, authoritative, then we go into a survival mode every time we meet with her or him, right? It's automatic. So you have that one-on-one meeting where you're just, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. And you're, yes, we'll get this done. I'm intentionally exaggerating to make the point. You do that to get through that meeting, even though you're a leader. Maybe it's the chairman of the board and you're the CEO. It doesn't matter. At some point, right? Then you walk into a group of your peers, CEOs from other countries and other firms, and everyone's talking about affiliative and participative, and everyone's friends, and it's friendly, and we're trusting, and we're communicating because we're eye to eye. And then you go into a third meeting, a third hour in a row, and you're meeting with an employee and a team member, and it's the fourth time you've had this discussion about this particular issue. And now it's time to get tough. And you become the red boss that your boss is in that moment. And that's how it is. And all three in that context, again, I'm exaggerating a little bit, are appropriate. And to balance and to know when is it time to go and survive, or when is it time to actually lead and thrive. But I would like to bring it back to another point, though. It was an interesting thing from Dave. Dave, in one of your discussions with one of the CEOs you met with, the takeaway that I heard was taking the emotion out of the leadership. And actually, I see it exactly the opposite. Be the emotional person that you are as a leader, as an authentic leader. Does it mean going, having empathy, but maybe not losing it at work, right? I go exactly the opposite. The emotional engagement of leaders in the last 3 or 4 months has risen to a level that we've never seen before. And in German, you would say, und das ist gut so. And it's good like that, because we haven't had that type of emotional engagement in the past. And it's been a missing ingredient for a lot of leaders. So I'd like to challenge the point coming in from Dave a little bit.
Dave, would you like to say a few words on this?
Just that was Matthias Schraner who I quoted. Let me say it again. That was Matthias Schraner who I quoted, and it was related to his decision-making process much more than to his leadership.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then you have to be very objective, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
Now, Dave, to lead on this, so Robert is saying context matters, balance is important, when to lead, when to thrive. What were some of the biggest failures your interview candidates were facing or have been facing during the pandemic? And how do you see they have actually learned from it?
Well, I don't know how they have learned from it, but I think the biggest failure that can happen in such a situation is that you have no way of knowing where to go next. And I experienced that. We didn't put that in a post, of course, so we just reframed the whole thing. But there were CEOs who had no clue of going in which direction to go whatsoever. And you won't find that in the post, as I said before, but I think that's when everything ends. Like, you have no idea about how to help your organization to survive.
We often talk about agility. This has been used a great deal in recent time, especially when facing a crisis such as this one. How can one be effectively agile under such tremendous pressure that comes out of a crisis such as this? Does anyone want to share his or her thoughts on this?
I would like to give an example. of what I have seen in my industry, for example, with Nike and their CEO, John O'Hare, how he reacted and listened to his team, especially starting from China, right? So he defined basically, okay, there will be 4 phases. So the confinement, so people will move to, of course, e-commerce, and then reopening, normalization, and of course afterwards, you know, what will be the everyday. And what they have done, Nike in China, is very interesting. They have, as soon as there was a lockdown, they went, of course, to a digital communication with their customers, but not by pushing their products, but by recommending them to download, you know, their training app, where they offered many online courses for, you know, at home training, etc. So the focus was on the experience and what could be, you know, seen as an occupation for the people that were at home in a healthy way and without pushing the single products, right? And this had, of course, that played a very big role in the loyalty to the brand among the customers. And they can see that already now that shops open. So they have applied the same framework, if you want, to Korea as well as to Japan. And I think they will follow up, you know, by country when they start opening up again, or, you know, adopting this way of, it's a great way of branding and building customer loyalty.
Maybe Cedric.
Good example, Isabel. Before I turn to Rob, I will remind our alumni and participants that you can submit your questions using the Q&A button at the very bottom of your screen. Rob, you have worked for or in multinational companies. Do you believe that agility, which is what we mentioned right before, is achievable in such a context?
Yes, it's more difficult. So the old example of a aircraft carrier, my military examples, you know, aircraft carrier versus a destroyer or a speedboat. Yeah, you can turn an aircraft carrier. It takes a lot of effort to turn it, for it to be agile, right? It takes 10 miles, 10 ocean miles for an aircraft carrier to turn around. A speedboat is the smaller organizations are going to be more agile. However, this big aircraft carrier has resources to do this. That's the thing. So in these times, unfortunately, I've seen so many small businesses dying, just dying because they didn't have the resources, the depth, the longevity that the bigger firms have. So it's this balance as well. We complain about these big, huge mammoth companies and how unable they are, and yet who's surviving in these very critical times? It's the ones that have been able to plan much, much farther, being able to save the money, have the people, and so forth. So at the same time, it's very, very, very hard for them to be agile. I'm just working with an organization right now. I can't name the name. It's a household name in the West. It's becoming a household name in the East. You would be shocked how in 10 years of this company's history, how unable it's been how unable it is now to be agile versus where it was. Yeah.
Now, allow me to open this up a bit. So we have been focusing on the businesses of Christoph and Isabel. We know that China came out of the lockdown before, of course, most of the European countries. Do you see, from your perspective, that China or businesses in China have something to teach to SMEs in Europe? Is that something from your experience? And this question is open to all panelists. Do you feel that China has something to teach to businesses in Europe or elsewhere?
Well, I'll jump in. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a tendency in these times to, there are two tendencies. One is to become too blue. Let's ask everybody what they think. And in the West, often the democratization of leadership, almost down to the lowest level, in a very challenging time of where do we go tomorrow? How do I pay my people? Do I fire them? You need a strong leader, a directive, an authoritative leader in that moment, right? And sometimes we're seeing that that's been lacking a little bit. So, you know, we're learning, I always do this when we're talking, the bridge between, let's say, China and Europe that we're trying to build as an institution. We're looking to see what of the best about management and leadership that we can bring here and vice versa. So my very, very clear answer is, yes, we can learn again to be more directive and more authoritative from Chinese businessmen, and they can learn how to be more participative, how to be more democratic in their leadership style from us. So absolutely.
Fair enough, fair enough. Allow me to, if you don't mind, to open this up, because we have a few questions coming in from alumni. So since we are talking about leadership, I have a question here. The question goes, we have seen the importance of good leadership, but also the importance of bad leadership. How about the argument that the importance of leadership is overrated, while it is more important to invest on education and remove communication barriers so that people are actually better, collectively better than leaders? We have a question basically about good and bad leadership. Does anyone feel inspired to tackle this? Perhaps Dave, since you brought up quite a few characteristics, would you feel inspired to comment on this question? Dave, you are on mute.
I'm really not sure what to say about that. Can I think a little more and Robert goes first? Or do you have anything else, Robert, at all?
Yeah, again, going back to this theory, this green of this passive defensive style that people get into of survival, hunkering down, holding onto the chair, hoping, closing their eyes, hoping this is just going to go away, is not acceptable in a leadership role today. And we're seeing this. People, you yourself said, people don't know what to do, right? That's, in essence, that's what they've done. They're kind of doing the ostrich effect of putting their head into the sand and thinking, let's just wait for this storm to go away. It's not going to go away. It's going to change your business model, but you have no choice than to step up to that plate. Do you know where to go? Not necessarily. You're going to make even more mistakes? Absolutely. But unless you make mistakes, you're not going to get anywhere. So I think there is some bad lessons for leadership. I think there are some bad things happening also with not communicating, for example. I think Christoph pointed out very, very bluntly, you have to communicate very, very clearly every day to your people. What's happening? Where are we going? Why are we doing this? And yet with decisiveness and clarity and with empathy and nurturing at the same time, right? It's tough. And if you're not doing that, yes, that's bad leadership.
I would like to hear about that from Isabel as well. What do you think? Because the last part of that question, Isabel, is do you think that, let me just read it from here. The importance of leadership is overrated. While it is more important to invest in education and remove communication barriers so that people are actually collectively better than any leaders, good or bad. How do you see that?
I've written my answer, but I think that investing in education is per se vital for any types of organization. You never stop learning, right? And I think it's very important for everybody in the organization to be, especially in technology, right? Because we are in technology. So of course, our developers have to go, to courses, and our marketing people have to know about the latest ways to either communicate or make ourselves visible, etc. But for me, I think putting in place talented people in a team, if they have ideas, if they have suggestions, I don't think that a leader can lead alone. You know what I mean? I think it's teamwork. Whether you're a small organization or a larger organization, you have to lead by also listening, but also promoting this startup mentality, even if you are a very large organization, right? And this is by enabling, if you want, people to thrive and come up with either future plans, whether it is in a software, or whether it is in marketing, or whether it is in product development. It doesn't matter. But I think the key here is never stop thinking like a startup.
Isabel, can I jump?
That's what I would think.
Maybe I'm jumping in here. I just wanted to give you a fun example that we did, actually, how to bring people and get their creative juices going. So obviously, as a leader, you need to make a lot of decisions all the time. And I always talk about informed decisions. So as I said, I think it would be ignorant to think that me with my one brain, I could make all the decisions. That's why participatory leadership is so important. But one thing we did, for example, and in my past roles, when I was not a CEO, I sometimes hated that the leadership would take decisions and you just couldn't understand why did they make these decisions. And they probably had very good reasons, but they just didn't communicate. So ultimately you get frustrated because you think like, why did they make these decisions? And so one of the things we did, one on collectively bringing the team together and get the creative juices flowing, is that I threw out some of the decisions or some of the questions that were going through our leadership team and decisions we had to make, sometimes really quite tough ones. And we created challenges. And so the trophy was for the winning team, was actually a bottle of champagne that I would offer to the winning team. And so we put people together that were not working in the same teams usually. So of course, one can imagine everybody's in lockdown, people sit in their living rooms or in their studies somewhere in front of their computers, so they had no interaction. So what we did is we randomly put people together who would normally not even work together, and then they had to brainstorm for an hour on these solutions, then submit the solutions, and we would award them. And the results were quite amazing sometimes. I mean, that's why, like, one is impressed how deep people think, how much they're reflected, how they bring you out of the box ideas that you, again, couldn't think about.
Our alumna from Ghana is making a remark and brings up that the chameleon analogy or situational leadership is very suitable for this situation. Now, this resonates very well with Robert's comedian analogy, be the emotional person you are and adjust to the context. We have from Gianluca a couple of questions that are directed specifically to Christoph and Isabel. Apparently a lot of alumni are still concerned with the travel restrictions in place. So how does your business deal with the travel ban and travel restrictions? Would you care to comment, Isabel and Christoph?
Ladies first, Isabel, over to you.
I'm sorry, I was answering a question from one of the participants, specifically on sizing. So I would let you start.
Okay, thank you, Isabel. So for us, of course, it's a big challenge. I mean, I should have, just to give you a sense, since the lockdown started, I should have traveled to about 4 to 5 countries where we have various projects. So of course, everything was canceled. One of the advantages we have as an organization, we have our own teams on the ground, and they worked all the way through. And I think what I found also quite impressive is that some of our colleagues, and I think this is sometimes a bit sort of also the advantage that we have very few expats in the field, but some of them who work in really difficult situations, they decided actually to stay and did not go back to their home countries. But it also highlights the issue that we actually do have that luxury. I mean, I have the luxury, I'm living in this country here where we have a really strong health system. How is it actually if you're, for example, living in a refugee camp somewhere, either in Lesbos or in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, and you just cramp together? So I think that puts a lot of things into perspective. And obviously, I mean, with technology today, we were amazingly well connected. And literally, I mean, I had sometimes days I would start my calls at 7 a.m. in the morning, and by 9 p.m. I would get off my last call. You know, I mean, my ear nearly falling off at some point. But it was so important. And I have to say, maybe sometimes even almost 50% of those calls is encouragement. Keep on going. We stand behind you. You know, I mean, people were so overwhelmed at times, and it was just so important to be strong and empathetic for them and with them. And I think here my tip is in many ways, I mean, of course, we help children around the world. So it is a very satisfying goal, but it is keep that vision on repeating and repeating and repeating. And I would always tell every single one of my employees, don't forget who we are there for and what we do and why we do what we do. Mm-hmm. So Isabel, maybe over to you now. Thank you.
Of course, thank you, Christoph. From our side, things happen in different phases, right? So we have an office here. We were the first ones in lockdown, followed by the US, and followed now by Belarus, Minsk, where the situation is right now, very bad. So there was a bit of delay in terms of the team location, right? In terms of customers, it's about the same thing. So Australia is where we have some customers. So getting up even earlier than you, right? Taking calls at 5:30 in the morning, but obviously being able to travel and see them face to face is an advantage, I have to be honest. But having the possibility now with Zoom, Google Meet, name it, Skype, whatever, to communicate is great. We have to be thankful that it's working 99.9% of the time. And since we are all in the same situation, actually it's not that bad, right? We are all in the same situation. And that makes it a bit easier, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Christoph. If the panelists do not wish to add anything further, we are about to come close to the end. I have just a second, an attendee who raises his hand. I would have liked to hear some comments from alumni based in China or working for an MNC. But if we do not have this at this stage, we will keep this for the next webinar. Good. So thank you, panel members. Thank you very much for this very honest and insightful feedback that you shared with us. Thank you for the actionable items and learnings. Thank you, Dr. Robert Stroh. Thank you to our speakers, Dave, Isabel, and Christoph. We are coming close to an end. A few more words. A follow-up email will be sent to you, the audience, early next week with these slides, of course, and a link to view the recording. So not to worry, you will have it all. You will also receive info on the next webinar, and I just have to look. So the next webinar is on June the 10th. The topic will be post-pandemic emergence of new business models. End of June and early July, a session on the risk landscape in post-COVID-19 times, and one on the future of healthcare. As you see, we will keep you busy during the entire summer. That's it for tonight. Thank you again to our speakers, and thank you all for joining. Take good care now. Have a great day. Have a good night.